Picture this. You finally close on the house of your dreams. Manicured lawn, fresh paint, the kind of cul-de-sac where kids still ride bikes after dinner. You haul that first cardboard box across the threshold, drop it on the kitchen counter, and you let yourself smile. You did it. This is yours. And then, 3 weeks in, a beige envelope shows up in the mailbox. No return address. Just a logo and a barcode. You open it standing right there at the curb, and the first line punches you in the gut. Special assessment. $28,000. Due in 90 days. Welcome to the neighborhood. That envelope is the moment most homeowners realize they did not actually buy a house. They bought a permission slip. And that is exactly why you should never buy a house with an HOA without knowing what you are walking into. I am going to walk you through a real situation that happened in a quiet little subdivision called Maple Ridge Crossing, just outside a mid-sized town that could be any town in America. Names are changed, the subdivision is fictional, but the playbook is 100% ripped from the kind of HOA horror stories playing out in Florida, Colorado, Texas, the Carolinas, and yeah, probably the development you drove past on the way home from work yesterday. You are going to meet a couple named Daniel and Renee Holloway. Mid-30s, first-time buyers, both teachers, both saved for almost a decade to put 20% down on a 3-bed colonial. You are going to meet their HOA board president, a retired insurance adjuster named Howard Pinkham, who has been waiting his whole life for someone to give him a clipboard and the word jurisdiction. And you are going to see, in painful detail, how a community that looked perfect on Zillow turned into the most expensive mistake the Holloways ever made. By the end of this video I want you walking away with 3 things. First, a clear-eyed list of the actual financial traps an HOA can spring on you long after the closing table. Second, the red flags hiding inside those CCRS and meeting minutes that buyers almost never read. And third, the mindset shift that separates people who get crushed by these associations from the people who sidestep the whole thing. So grab a coffee, get comfortable, and stick with me. Because if you remember nothing else, remember this. Why you should never buy a house with an HOA is not a clickbait title. It is a warning. And it is the warning Daniel and Renee wish somebody had given them 18 months ago. Story set up: Daniel and Renee were not reckless people. If anything, they were the kind of buyers a mortgage broker dreams about. Renee taught 5th grade. Daniel taught high school chemistry and coached JV baseball on the side for the extra stipend. They drove cars they had paid off years ago, they kept a spreadsheet of every dollar that left their checking account, and they had the kind of credit scores that made the loan officer literally whistle. So when their realtor, a friendly woman named Patty, walked them through Maple Ridge Crossing on a bright Saturday in early spring, the place felt like a reward. Sidewalks edged so clean they looked freshly trimmed with scissors. Crepe myrtle staked along the entrance. A little community pool with a wrought iron fence and a sign that said residents only, please. Renee actually grabbed Daniel's arm in the driveway of the Colonial on Birchwood Lane. She did not say it out loud, but she did not have to. This was the one. The asking price was right at the top of their budget, but it was workable. The school district was top tier. The commute to both schools was under 20 minutes. And the HOA fee, Patty mentioned almost in passing, was just $240 a month. Renee did the math in her head, shrugged, and said, that is basically what we already pay for a streaming bundle and the gym we never use. They put in an offer that night. Now here is where I want you to pay close attention, because this part is where almost every HOA story goes sideways, and where Daniel and Renee made the same mistake roughly 90% of buyers in association communities make. When the closing packet showed up, it was huge. We are talking a binder, not a folder. Inside that binder were the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, which everyone in the industry just calls the CCRS. There was a copy of the bylaws. A copy of the most recent annual budget. A copy of the reserve study. And the meeting minutes from the last 6 board meetings. Daniel actually flipped through the CCRS for about 10 minutes one evening. He read the section on paint colors, laughed at the rule about basketball hoops needing to be stored in the garage between sundown and sunrise, and tossed the binder onto the coffee table. Renee never opened it. Not once. They closed on a Tuesday. They moved in on a Thursday. By Friday night they were eating pizza off paper plates on the living room floor, drunk on possibility, planning out a vegetable garden for the back corner of the yard. They were home. The first month was a honeymoon. They met the neighbors on either side. They got a wave from the older couple across the street. They figured out that the ice cream truck came through every Tuesday around 6, and they started leaving the porch light on for trick-or-treat practice runs with the niece. Then, in week 6, the first envelope arrived. Not the big one. That came later. This was a smaller envelope. Cream-colored. The HOA logo in the upper left. Inside was a single page citing them, in formal language, for a violation of Section 4.2 of the Architectural Standards. The violation. A garden gnome. A 4-inch tall ceramic gnome Renee had set on the front step as a housewarming gift to herself. According to Section 4.2, all front-facing ornamental items required pre-approval from the Architectural Review Committee, and unapproved items were subject to a fine of $50 per day until removed. They had 4 days to comply or the meter started running. Daniel laughed when he read it. Renee did not. She walked outside, picked up the gnome, and brought it into the kitchen. She set it on the counter next to the citation, looked at her husband, and said one sentence that, looking back, was the first crack in everything. She said, "What else is in that binder?" Main conflict that weekend. Renee finally sat down and read the binder. All of it. And what she found in those pages told her, in slow motion, what the next year and a half of their lives was going to look like. The CCRS ran 146 pages. There were rules about how high your grass could grow. 3.5 inches. Maximum. Rules about which shades of beige, taupe, and gray you could paint your shutters. There was an approved pallet stapled to the back. Rules about garbage cans. They had to be inside the garage by 9 p.m. on collection day or it was a $175 fine. Rules about flags. You could fly a U.S. flag, but only on a wall-mounted bracket, not a freestanding pole, and not anything else, no state flags, no team flags, no welcome banners. Rules about pets. 2 animals maximum, neither over 40 pounds, and God help you if your dog barked between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. because the third complaint triggered a hearing. Rules about cars. No commercial vehicles in the driveway. No vehicles with visible logos. No vehicles parked on the street between midnight and 6 a.m. No vehicles with expired tags, and the board reserved the right to define expired. Renee turned every page slower than the last. By the end she was not laughing anymore. But the rules, honestly, were not even the worst part. The worst part was buried in the financials. Maple Ridge Crossing had been built in the late 80s. The clubhouse roof was original. The pool deck was original. The retaining walls along the back of the development, the ones that held back a slope behind 8 of the homes, those were original too. And the reserve fund, the pot of money the HOA was supposed to be setting aside for exactly these kinds of major repairs, was, according to the most recent reserve study, funded at 23% of recommended levels. 23%. For an aging community with major infrastructure on borrowed time. Renee did not know what that number meant when she first read it. She Googled it. And what Google told her made her hands go cold. A reserve fund under 30% meant the community was, in plain English, financially fragile. One bad year, one big repair, one insurance carrier walking away, and the difference would have to come straight out of the homeowner's pockets. Through what is called a special assessment. She showed Daniel the page. He read it twice. He said, "Surely they have a plan. They have to have a plan." They did not have a plan. Or rather, the plan was the homeowners. About a month after Renee finished the binder, the HOA held its quarterly meeting. Daniel and Renee went, partly out of curiosity and partly because Renee wanted to put a face to the people who were sending her the gnome notice. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a low-ceilinged room with folding chairs and a podium. Maybe 30 people showed up. The board sat at a long table at the front. And in the middle, in a navy polo shirt with the HOA logo embroidered over the heart, sat Howard Pinkham. Board president. 3 terms running. He had the kind of energy that made you sit up straighter without knowing why. Howard ran the meeting like a guy who had been waiting his whole career to run a meeting like this one. He read every agenda item out loud. He referenced bylaws by section number from memory. He paused, twice, to call out specific homeowners by name for ongoing violations. One of them was Daniel and Renee, for the Gnome, which had since been moved indoors but had triggered a follow-up inspection where, according to Howard, an unapproved welcome mat had also been observed. Renee felt her face go hot. She did not say a word. And then, near the end, Howard cleared his throat and got to the real reason most of the board was there. The pool deck inspection. The structural engineer's report had come back. The pool deck needed full replacement. The clubhouse roof needed full replacement. And, most expensive of all, 2 of the original retaining walls were showing failure indicators and needed to be rebuilt before the next heavy rain season. Total estimated cost, just over $1.2 million. The reserve fund had $380,000 in it. The shortfall, $820,000, would be raised, by motion of the board, through a one-time special assessment, divided evenly across the 112 homes in the community. Renee did the math in her head before Howard even finished the sentence. $820,000 divided by 112. Just under $7,300 per household. Not catastrophic. They could absorb it. Painful, but survivable. Then Howard kept talking. The $820,000, he explained, was just the immediate shortfall. To prevent this from happening again, the board was also voting to raise reserve contributions across all members, effective immediately. Monthly dues would jump from $240 to $410. Permanently. And the special assessment number Howard was about to ask the board to approve was not actually $7,300 per home. Because the engineer's number did not include contingency, did not include legal review, and did not include the new insurance binder the carrier was demanding before they would renew the master policy. With contingency, the assessment was rounding to $9,800 per home. Due in 2 installments over the next 9 months. The room got quiet in a way Renee had never heard a room get quiet before. There was a beat, then a guy in the back row said the word that everyone in the room was thinking but had not yet said out loud. He said no. Just that. No. Howard, without missing a beat, reminded him that this was a board vote, not a homeowner vote. Per the bylaws, special assessments under $15,000 per home did not require ratification by the membership. They could be passed by simple majority of the board. The motion carried 4-1. Daniel and Renee walked out of the clubhouse not speaking. They got home, sat down at the kitchen table, opened a laptop, and looked at their savings account. They had $11,000 in cash. After this, they would have $1,200. And the dues had just gone up by $170 a month for as long as they owned the home. Drama and climax that should have been the bottom. It was not. Over the next 4 months, the Holloways did everything they could think of to fight back. Renee, who had never in her life filed a formal anything, started reading state HOA statutes the way other people read mystery novels. She found that in their state, a homeowner could request a special meeting to challenge a board action if she could collect signatures from 25% of the membership. She started knocking on doors. Some doors opened to nodding heads. Yes, of course we will sign, this is insane. Other doors opened to people who quietly admitted they could not get involved because they were already 3 months behind on the dues hike and they were terrified of what Howard might do if they put their name on a petition. A few doors did not open at all, but Renee could hear the television playing on the other side. Slowly, evening after evening, she got the signatures. She got 28%. She submitted the petition, certified mail, return receipt. 2 weeks later she got a 1-paragraph letter from the HOA's attorney informing her that her petition had been deemed deficient on procedural grounds. 3 of the signatures, the letter said, came from homeowners who were currently delinquent on their dues, and per a 2019 board resolution, delinquent owners were not in good standing and therefore not eligible to sign petitions. Without those 3 names, she was at 24.7%. Just under the threshold. Renee read that letter 3 times. Then she set it down and she said, very quietly, they planned for this. While Renee was running the petition, Daniel was running the numbers. The first installment of the special assessment had hit. $4,900, gone, drained from the savings account that was already on life support. The second installment was due in 5 months. They were short. They had cut the cable, dropped both gym memberships, frozen the niece's birthday savings account, and Daniel had picked up a tutoring gig 3 nights a week that paid in cash. They were still short. And then the second envelope arrived. This one was thicker. Not from the HOA directly. From the HOA's attorney. The letter informed Daniel and Renee that they were now 16 days delinquent on the new monthly dues, that under Section 9 of the bylaws a $50 late fee had been assessed, that interest at 18% annualized was now accruing on the full balance, and that any unpaid balance over $600 would be referred for lien placement against the property within 30 days. They had paid the dues. Daniel pulled up the bank statement. The check had cleared. They had paid the dues. He called the HOA management company. He sat on hold for 43 minutes. When somebody finally picked up, the woman on the line, with the tone of somebody who had said this exact sentence 100 times that week, explained that the new monthly amount was $410, and the check Daniel had submitted was for $240. The difference, $170, plus the late fee, plus the accruing interest, was the delinquency. Daniel asked, very calmly, when exactly was he supposed to have been notified that his auto-pay amount had to change. The woman cited a notice that had been mailed, she said, in the second week of the previous month. Daniel and Renee had never received it. They went out to the mailbox that night and stood there in the dark, just looking at the empty box, like maybe the missing notice would still be in there. Now I want you to understand exactly how serious this had become. In their state, an HOA lien is what is called a super lien, which is a piece of legal terminology that, in plain English, means it can take precedence over a mortgage. So you can be perfectly current with your bank, paying every cent of your home loan on time, never missing a beat, and still lose your home to your HOA over a $170 misunderstanding. That is not hyperbole. There is a famous case out of Texas where a homeowner serving overseas in the Air Force came home to find his house had been foreclosed on by the HOA over $2,500 in missed dues. There is a case in North Carolina where a widow lost her paid-off home over an $800 landscaping fine. The Holloways now had a $1,200 bank balance, a $4,900 second installment coming, a delinquency that was growing every day, and a board president who, 2 weeks earlier at a community Easter event, had walked past Renee in the parking lot and made a point of saying loud enough for 2 other neighbors to hear, "Some people just are not Maple Ridge people." That was the night Renee broke. She did not cry, exactly. She sat on the edge of the bed with her shoes still on, looking at the wall, and she said to Daniel, "We have to sell." Daniel had been quietly thinking the same thing for 2 weeks. The problem, of course, was that selling was not as simple as calling Patty and putting a sign in the yard. Because in their state, before any sale could close, the HOA had to issue what is called an estoppel certificate. A document confirming the seller was current on all dues, fines, and assessments. And the HOA's attorney had 30 days, by statute, to produce that certificate. They could, and did, take every one of those 30 days. They could, and did, attach a $450 processing fee. And, most importantly, the certificate would list every fine, every assessment, every accrued interest charge that the buyer would inherit at closing. Patty walked through the house in late summer. She gave the Holloways a number. Comparable colonials in nearby non-HOA neighborhoods were selling for $42,000 to $45,000 more than what they could realistically list at, because the second any informed buyer saw the words $2,000 special assessment carrying through closing, they walked. Patty was honest. She said, "You can sell. You can probably sell in 90 days. But you are going to walk away from this house with less money than you came in with. And you are going to write a check at closing to do it." Renee asked the question she already knew the answer to. She asked, "How much of a check?" Patty pulled out a calculator. She did the numbers, twice. She looked up. 18,000. Give or take. To get out of the house they had spent a decade saving to get into. Hey, I want to pause here for 1 second, because I know this story is heavy and I do not want you to miss the point on it. If anything you have heard so far has hit close to home, whether you are about to buy in an HOA community, you currently live in one, or you are just somebody who has been seeing more and more of these horror stories on your feed, do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell. I drop new HOA breakdowns, real cases, board misconduct stories, and homeowner rights walkthroughs every single week, and the only way you do not miss the next one is if you are subscribed. While you are at it, drop a comment below and tell me one thing. What is the most ridiculous HOA rule you have personally run into? A weird paint color rule. A garbage can rule. A flag rule. A pet rule. The wilder the better, because honestly some of the comments on these videos turn into the best content I have all week. Read them, share them with somebody who needs to see them, and let me know what state you are watching from. I want to map out where the worst of this is happening. Okay. Back to Daniel and Renee. Because the story is not actually over. And how it ends is, honestly, the most important part of the whole video. Because what happens next is the difference between a horror story and a warning that actually changes what you do next. Daniel and Renee did not sell. Not right away. Renee, somewhere between the bedroom conversation and the meeting with Patty, made one more phone call. She called a real estate attorney. Not Patty's preferred closing attorney, not the HOA's attorney, a third party. A woman named Marisol Vega who had spent 18 years specifically representing homeowners against associations. The first 30-minute consultation was free. Renee took it. And in that 30 minutes, 3 things came out of Marisol's mouth that changed everything. First, the new monthly dues hike. Marisol asked Renee for a copy of the meeting minutes from the night the increase was passed. She read them in about 4 minutes. Then she asked, did the board provide written notice of the increase to all homeowners at least 30 days before the effective date, as required under the bylaws? Renee said no. Marisol marked something on a legal pad. Second, the petition rejection. Marisol asked for a copy of the 2019 board resolution that disqualified delinquent owners from signing. Renee emailed it over from her phone. Marisol read it. Then she asked, was that resolution ever ratified by a vote of the membership, as required under Section 11 of the same bylaws? Renee said she did not know. Marisol asked her to find out. Renee called the management company that afternoon. The answer, after 2 days of pressing, was no. The 2019 resolution had been adopted by the board alone. It had never gone to a membership vote. Marisol, on speakerphone the next morning, said one sentence. She said, then the resolution is voidable, and the petition is valid. Third, the lien threat. Marisol asked when the original notice of the dues increase had supposedly been mailed. Daniel gave her the date. Marisol asked if the management company had retained a certificate of mailing or any proof of delivery. The answer, once Renee dug into it, was no. They had a record that the notice had been printed. They had no record it had been. Marisol filed a formal challenge to the lien on the Holloway's behalf, citing improper notice. Within 10 business days the lien threat was withdrawn, the late fees were reversed, and the back balance was reduced to the actual $170 dues difference, which the Holloways paid that same afternoon. The petition got refiled with the 3 previously disqualified signatures included. With those signatures it crossed 31%. The board, suddenly under a real spotlight, called a special meeting. The special assessment did not get repealed. That was never realistic. The infrastructure work genuinely had to happen, and the money genuinely had to come from somewhere. But what did happen, under pressure, was a renegotiated payment plan that spread the second installment over 24 months instead of 9. Howard, somewhere along the way, did not run for a 4th term. The new board president was a woman named Anna, a former municipal accountant, who walked in on day 1 with a 5-year reserve recovery plan and started posting the budget publicly every quarter. Daniel and Renee still live in the Colonial on Birchwood Lane. They are not happy about it. They are not going to tell you the HOA fixed itself, because it did not. Their dues are still $410 a month. They are still paying the assessment. The garden gnome is still in the kitchen. But they are not losing the house. Now here is the part of this video I really need you to hear. Because Daniel and Renee got lucky. They had savings. They had energy. They had a wife who had the time and the temperament to read a 146-page document, knock on every door in the subdivision, and find an attorney willing to fight for them. Most homeowners in their position do not have all four of those things. Most homeowners just lose. So if you are sitting there right now thinking about buying a house in an HOA community, here is what I want you to walk away with. Before you make an offer, get the documents. All of them. The CCRS, the bylaws, the rules and regulations, the most recent annual budget, the most recent reserve study, the most recent year-end financial audit, and the meeting minutes from at least the last 12 months. Not the last 3. The last 12. Read them. Yes, all of them. If reading legal documents is not your thing, hire a real estate attorney for $200 or $300 to read them for you. That is the cheapest insurance you will ever buy. When you read the reserve study, look at one number. The percent funded. Anything under 50% is a yellow flag. Anything under 30% is a screaming red flag. When you read the meeting minutes, look for 2 phrases. Special assessment. And dues increase. If those phrases show up in the last year, they are going to show up again. When you read the budget, look at the insurance line. If insurance has gone up more than 15% year over year, you are looking at a community where the carrier is nervous, and a carrier that is nervous is a carrier that is about to walk. When you read the CCRS, do not just laugh at the silly rules. Look at Section 9, the enforcement